Hello, welcome back to my channel. And today I am going to do a single book talk, single book review, single book rambling. Yeah, although I don't usually call it a review because that word sounds very professional. Anyway, I'm going to talk about this book, The Return by K.S. Maniam. And before I get into all the book talks, you might hear some noises in the background. I think there are quite a lot of myna birds outside, and they can get quite noisy. So, yeah, you might hear those sounds. Yeah, uh, let's proceed with the book talk. Now, I actually just finished this one recently, and while I was reading this, I also found out that this book was actually an assigned reading in Malaysia a few years ago. In fact, and you know, it was the assigned reading for the national exam that I also had to sit. I sat for the exam in 2010, and this book was actually one of the choices. I didn't remember that detail while I was reading this book because when I sat for the exam, we did not read this book. I think this book was assigned for students who live in certain states in Malaysia. I lived in a different state, and so my state, we got The Pearl by John Steinbeck, the abridged version, but we read that one, and so all of my responses in that exam was based on The Pearl. And other students, they got The Return. And that would mean quite a bunch of students would have read The Return, especially as a reading in school. So I suppose there may be some kind of popularity with this book, but it is surprisingly not very well known here in Malaysia. I don't think many people really know about this book or even about this author. Especially among contemporary readers. So I don't know, it's just kind of strange because after I finish reading this, I feel that this book is quite well written. It is a very slim book, but it feels very complex. Like there are so many layers in this book. It's just, I don't know, it feels like a pity for me not to ramble about those in my channel. So here we are talking about The Return, a Malaysian novel written by a Malaysian author. So K.S. Maniam, he was a Malaysian author, and I have not read any of his works before. So this book is the first of his that I've read. Although it was actually quite a lucky find because I don't think this book is widely sold. This was a second-hand copy. So what is The Return about? In this book we have this Indian family. They live in Malaya. It was before the independence, and this Indian family, they are really poor. They live in poverty, and so we actually are introduced to the matriarch of that family. Her name is Periatai, and one of the things that really defines her in this book, the beginning of this book, is that she is very she has her mind set on keeping her land. Like she's living in Malaya, she's living in her house. However, the problem is that her land isn't exactly hers officially. There is no letter, no official document saying that that land belongs to her. But she lives there, she has her house there, and she is very insistent on not giving up that land to the government until she dies. And it was around the time, or rather towards the time that she dies, we are introduced to the protagonist of this story and also the narrator of this novel. His name is Ravi, and we are introduced to him when he is still a very when he's a young boy at the age of primary school. And he he is living with his family, that consists of his mom, his father, and also his stepmom, because his father has two wives. Although his stepmom becomes somewhat of a more important figure compared to his mom, because his mom actually remains nameless in this book, and his stepmom actually has a name, and she does a lot more actions in the story. But anyway, the stepmom actually dreams about sending Ravi to an English school one night, which was sort of like a random thing that happens. But because this family is, or rather, their stepmom is actually quite superstitious, the family actually goes through with that. They sort of made the decision to send Ravi to an English school, and so Ravi is introduced to a whole new different world, the one that is very different from his life at home in his neighborhood, where he has to help his stepmom wash clothes for a rich man who lives nearby, who is sort of in charge of something at the local hospital. And this rich man is also an Indian descent person, but he is rich, he has status, and so he sort of becomes a big figure that looms over the rest of the poorer Indian families in the locale. And so Ravi gets sent to an English school, and he gets introduced to this whole new world that's totally different from his home life, and that sort of sets this whole change, the starting of a change, or rather the sense that there could be a change, that Ravi could actually change the condition of his house, of his home, and the poverty that they have to live in. And reading the title of this book, The Return, it sort of has this implication that there might be some kind of like before and after sort of story, where we're talking about class struggles. You have family that starts out very poor in the beginning, and when you have something called The Return, and you have a character get sent to an English school, which is obviously a signifier of a higher class in a society, you might imagine that there is a kind of plot line that involves some kind of a change in class, and that was my expectation of the story, although towards the end it didn't turn out that way. It has a slightly different trajectory. The plot has a different direction than what I have expected, and I'm actually quite surprised by that, and I like that. And there's a lot of discussion about class, obviously, in this book, and how people from different classes interact with one another. Now we have a few dynamics here, obviously. We have Ravi's family and other neighbors, how they interact with this richer Indian guy who lives in this bigger house than them, and how they sort of have to kowtow to this richer Indian person, which is one of the motif in here. Like, we see people of a lower class having to bow down in front of people of higher stature, and we also have this English school, which is kind of like a representation of the presence of the English in Malaya at that time. Now this was before independence, so we certainly have the British presence here, and so that English school sort of represents the symbol, sort of represents the presence of the British in Malaya. And obviously the British, they would naturally represent someone of a higher level in the society. So that was interesting as well. But that, the second interaction, it sort of brings out a totally different kind of implication. Ravi, this boy, having to he goes into this place where we, the contemporary readers, would probably see as something that is sort of it's not a particularly healthy relationship for between the colonized and the colonizers, but he finds comfort in that. So that's kind of interesting as well. So yeah, the story actually becomes more, the plot becomes heightened. It becomes escalated once Ravi realizes that there is this potential that his life and his family's life can change with his education. And in a way, the story does use that to escalate the tension in this book. But the sources of the tension is also quite, I would say, fun to read, because one of the sources of tension in this book is actually between Ravi and his other poor neighbors, Ravi's family and his poor neighbors. We're talking about people of the similar social status. The neighbors are also poor, like Ravi's family, but there is this kind of dynamics that arise because Ravi is sent to an English school, and soon he learns to speak good English, and there's this kind of animosity that surfaces once that happens. And I must say that this is something that still is ongoing in modern Malaysian society, especially when it comes to places that are not as urban, and there's this kind of the situation in which a person can sort of get jeered for trying to be a bit so-called higher than others, which is a problem by itself. And I really like the fact that this book explores that. So there's already these different kinds of dynamics here in this book. Now, another thing that this book explores is also the cost of identity. This book is very much a book about identity politics. It's not only about class struggle, but also about identity, since we have the character who is of a Indian family living in pre-independence Malaya. Now, they are sort of considered as immigrant, and I mean, even now, many people would consider, Indian Malaysians, Chinese Malaysians as immigrants here in this country. A statement that I find, that I consider to be total rubbish. But at that time, they were considered immigrants. The matriarch of the family does not own a land, and so they sort of live in Malaya as squatters. Basically, they don't have a place that they really call home. They don't really have a root, like a literal root that really tethers them to Malaya, and it sort of becomes a point, a really important point in this book, something that eventually leads to a rather tragic ending in this book, involving Ravi's family. One of his family members sort of meets a particular end towards the end of this book because of that, because of this desire to feel like a person, to feel this sense of the need of identity in a place where you seemingly don't have one. And I feel that even today, this theme really is really poignant, especially in Malaysian society as well. And so that is why I think that this book is, because it's very relevant even in today's world. I think that it's really needs to be read by Malaysians, especially. Even if you're not Malaysian, I think this book it shows a particular snippet of of the society, of the pre-independence Malayan society, that is not usually focused on because it's poor people, and we also don't get to see a lot of narratives involving Indian Malayan or Indian Malaysian and their history in Malaya. And I feel that, yeah, I think that this is a good starting point. It was certainly a starting point for me, and ultimately it's very well written. So yeah, I guess that's all I'm going to say about this book. If you have read this book, let me know what you think about it, or maybe if you are interested in reading this book also. Any comments that you have, feel free to leave them down below. Like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.